Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 W.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC Radio. We are the crown jewel of AM radio. And for the next 2 hours, we're going to be talking politics, news, history, food, style, and much, much more. So don't touch that dial. Well, it's on. We're going to have presidential debates even before either party has nominated its candidate for president. Things were incredibly chaotic last Wednesday when the story broke that President Joe Biden had rejected a plan from the Commission on Presidential Debates, which, by the way, is not appointed by the president, is not a commission, and is not about debates. It's actually a private organization. The co-chairs are the heads of the Republican and Democratic Party, and their rules are designed to keep any other minor party or independent party candidate out of the race. But Joe Biden rejected their plan and then immediately challenged former President Donald Trump to 2 debates. I think to Biden's surprise, President Trump immediately agreed. The first debate, it will be scheduled on CNN in Atlanta on June 27th, with a second debate on ABC News on September 10th. Now, as a Trump supporter, let me say that I do have some concerns. I mean, I don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't eat out of the toilet. And I'm concerned about debate rules that require, for example, that President Trump's microphone be turned off while Sleepy Joe is talking. I'm also concerned about the fact that there will be no studio audience. And then you look at the moderators for the CNN debate. They are Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, both hardcore Trump haters. I view this upcoming debate kind of like 3-on-1. In other words, Biden, Bash, and Clapper versus Donald Trump. And of course, with CNN in control of the microphones, this could very well be a setup. Now, it also could be a setup for Joe Biden. By that, I mean, I still believe, given his dismal poll ratings, on the one hand, he may be seeking an early debate in order to try to change the narrative and to breathe life back into what is very clearly a listing presidential campaign. But therefore, if he went to the debate and he gets blown out, the argument to replace him at the Democratic National convention, which I don't believe is until late July, would be irresistible. But why is this happening so early? Certainly, both the Trump and Biden campaigns are clear, even if the Commission on Presidential Debates was not, that millions of Americans are going to vote well before the November 5th election. Those voters need a chance to see and hear the candidates debate before they vote, not after. I mean, Donald Trump has broken all the norms and the traditions, but you can see how anxious these guys are to get at each other. And I think that a lot of this decision making is born of that. Look at it from Biden's point of view. He's got multiple problems. He's trailing in the polls, especially in the key states, and a lot of voters have already made up their minds about him. In addition, as of right now, this is a period in which the number of undecideds is very small. He's locked in a very tight race where he's trailing. So if the polls don't change by late June, when the first debate is scheduled, Biden could be facing, as I said, a larger problem, a hardened segment of the electorate that will not vote for him under any circumstances. He needs to change the narrative, and he needs to change it sooner rather than later. That's why I think he has made this challenge. I also think it could, as I say, be a trap. In every presidential election this century, with the exception of the one, the candidate who was leading in the polls in late June went on to win the presidency. There's only one exception to that rule, and that was Donald Trump. He was actually trailing in the polls in June of 2016, but as you know, he went on to defeat Hillary Clinton. Of course, this decision by Joe Biden to challenge Donald Trump and Trump's decision to accept these two debate dates really leads to the obvious question, where does that leave Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? See, starting in 1960, the debates used to be sponsored by the League of Women Voters. Then there was the rise of the Presidential Commission on Debates, which is not appointed by the president, is not a commission, and is not really about debates. They used a 15% rule, meaning a candidate would have to register 15% in 3 consecutive polls in order to participate in the debate. That was designed to keep any candidate but the Republican and the Democrat out. In 2012, when Libertarian candidate Governor Gary Johnson actually hit the magic 15 number in 3 successive polls, while the Presidential Commission on Debates had a hasty meeting in which they changed their criteria to 20%. The American people, however, have come to expect debate. In 1960, probably the most famous presidential debate, Richard Nixon assured his advisors, including President Eisenhower, Governor Tom Dewey of New York, Republican National Chairman Len Hall, who was from Long Island, that he would not debate the lesser-known Kennedy. But a bad sequence of events. Nixon bumped his knee on a car door. He developed a staph infection. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks after the conventions, after Labor Day. He had made an unwise decision to visit all 50 states. Meanwhile, John Kennedy was spending all of his time making a circuit between the handful of swing states. Nixon came roaring out of the hospital, 15 pounds underweight, still running a fever, still on antibiotics, against the advice of his doctors. He did 5 campaign rallies on his way to Chicago. He showed up in Chicago for the first debate, completely exhausted. When they went to the lighting test, which is kind of like the weigh-in in a prize fight, Teddy White said that John F. Kennedy looked like a bronzed god. Nixon got to Chicago, went immediately to his hotel room where he began cramming, looking at books and briefing books and preparing for the debate. John Kennedy was on the roof of his Chicago hotel, sunning himself with 2 gorgeous hookers. When the director of the debate, the legendary Don Hewitt, asked Senator John Kennedy whether he would be requiring makeup, Kennedy said, no makeup for me, whereupon he repaired to his dressing room and his personal makeup man, who'd been flown in from New York, made him up. Nixon's advisors were aghast about the fact that his suit, which was light gray, was very close to the tone of his face. He, hearing that Kennedy refused makeup, insisted that he would also refuse makeup. And his advisors convinced him to use a product called Lazy Shave, which is like a powder that you put over your 5 o'clock shadow. Anyway, the Kennedy advance men, knowing that Nixon had a propensity to sweat when under pressure, turned the air conditioning off in the Chicago studios. Richard Nixon was shocked when John Kennedy came at him not from the left, but from the right. Kennedy excoriated Nixon for being against a defense buildup, which Eisenhower opposed, and therefore Nixon, as vice president, could not oppose. He also excoriated Nixon for not being tough enough against the Chinese communists, who at that point were threatening to take 2 islands, Quemoy and Matsu, which the disputed control with nationalist China was a hot issue in the country. And Nixon was really reduced to trying to say that he and Kennedy were the same, just their methods were different. Listen to this cut.
The final point that I would like to make is this. Senator Kennedy has suggested in his speeches that we lack compassion for the poor, for the old, and for others that are unfortunate. Let us understand throughout this campaign that his motives and mine are sincere. I know what it means to be poor. I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
Now, what's amazing is that those who heard the Nixon-Kennedy debates on radio thought that Nixon had won, but those who watched the debates, and there were 4 of them, on television overwhelmingly thought Kennedy had won. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the vice presidential candidate, heard the debate on a car radio. He was campaigning in Texas, and he said to his driver, and I quote, "Well, the SOB lost it for us." Now, ironically, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, who was Nixon's vice presidential running mate, watched the debate on television, and he said to an aide, "Well, that SOB lost it for us." What people don't tell you is there were 3 more debates. The historians say, but the first had the largest television audience, and while that's true, the other 3 debates, all of which observers said Nixon had won, were quite different. Nixon got a sun lamp. Nixon went on a regimen of milkshakes. He gained back the 15 pounds. It is believed that he triumphed in the second and third debate. But what's most important is the fact that the fourth Nixon-Kennedy debate, had an audience that was only 100,000 people fewer than the first debate. Presidential debates have really become part of the American tradition. I think Biden would have had a very hard time refusing to debate. Probably the most famous debate was the Reagan-Carter debate. Now, people remember Reagan's election as a landslide. That's really not the case. If you go back and look at it historically, that race was much, much closer. But really, I think the moment came where Reagan won that debate when he asked Carter this question.
Next Tuesday is Election Day. Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. You'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have.
That devastating moment, I think, was the turning point that gave that presidential campaign to Ronald Reagan. Reagan had to prove to the American people that he was not a warmonger, not an extremist. And of course, television was Reagan's medium. He had been a major television star after he was a relatively minor movie star. Then there was the famous Reagan-Mondale debate, Reagan running for re-election. Many questions about whether he was too old for another term. Here's how Ronald Reagan handled that.
I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
That, of course, brought the House down, and it was over for Walter Mondale at that point, although perhaps it was already over for him. And then, of course, my favorite bite from the best of the Trump-Hillary Clinton debates. Listen to this.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
I knew at that moment that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency. If you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC. And if you hang around, we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio. Now would be a perfect time for you to go get the 77 WABC Radio app on your cell phone, because you don't want to miss any of the amazing talk or entertainment programming we have here at 77 WABC. Of course, if you live in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area where I grew up, you can always find us at 770 on the AM dial. But if you're any place else, literally in the world, we're live streaming at WABCradio.com at 173 countries worldwide, certainly every place in the United States. So I invite you to join us every Sunday from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern at WABCradio.com if you can't tune in on your AM radio. We've got a great show for you today. Could terrorists really shut down our power grid? I remember a few months ago when AT&T cell service went down just for a couple of hours. It was chaos. What would you do if we had no electricity? How realistic is the idea of a terrorist shutdown of our power grid? Colonel John Mills joins us today. He is a cyber terrorism expert, formerly with the Defense Department, where he served as Director of Cybersecurity, Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs for the U.S. Department of Defense. He'll join us on the Roger Stone Show today. President Trump's trial enters another week. Witness Michael Cohen seems to have bombed on the witness stand. Of course, it's hard to know. The New York Times said his testimony was devastating to Donald Trump, but legal analyst and George Washington University professor Jonathan Turley wrote in the New York Post that, Cohen never laid a finger on Trump, never actually connected Trump to the alleged crime. I would argue that Alvin Bragg hasn't even proven a crime. Todd Blanche, the president's lawyer, actually, I think, did a masterful job in his cross-examination in demonstrating that it certainly appears that what happened here was Michael Cohen's doing, that it was Cohen who went and took out a home equity line without telling Trump or his own wife in order to make the payments to Stormy Daniels under the non-disclosure agreement that he himself had arranged. Talking about that today, lawyer Mike Davis of the Amendment 3 Project joins us to try to analyze the entire tsunami of lawfare that is planned originally in a Florida courtroom, in a D.C. courtroom, in a Georgia courtroom, but now appears to be limited only to this New York case. I mean, I know Michael Cohen. I've known him for 30 years. I have to say, candidly, he's one of the dumbest people I've ever met. He calls himself Mr. Fix-It. Shocking to me that he actually had a TV pilot by that name that he was trying to peddle. He considered himself a political expert. If nothing else in the trial this past week, he proved his animus and therefore his motive to lie, his animus against President Trump. The name of his book is, of course, Revenge, which says it all, I think. Mike Davis, again, of the Article 3 Project, who's attended much of the trial, joins us to break that whole situation down. And then we're also going to touch today on the war in the Middle East. It's sometimes confusing and very hard to determine exactly what's happening. How can you have a drone and missile attack on Israel where only one person was killed? Everybody I know was glued to the television set. Colonel John Mills is going to explain that to us today, but so is Joel Gilbert, who joins us to talk about his two documentaries in the Middle East, but also to focus on the question of whether or not Joe Biden can make it all the way to the Democratic National Convention. For those who have listened to the Roger Stone Show, it's not a surprise to you that I have, for many months, predicted that Biden would not ultimately be the Democratic nominee, that ultimately the Democratic Party would nominate Michelle Obama. Now, let me kind of explain how that works. I've never said Michelle Obama was running for president. What I said was that she would be drafted. With this early debate and the potential for Joe Biden to potentially bomb in the early debate, that would leave more than sufficient time for the removal of Joe Biden, or I should say an announcement by Biden that he wasn't resigning as president, but that for reasons of health, that he would not seek another term. He could then legally release all of his pledged delegates, and they, in turn, could vote for any candidate they wanted. At that juncture, all of the polls show that Michelle Obama is far and away the most popular Democrat in the country, and I believe that she could be drafted. For those who say, well, Michelle Obama doesn't want to be president, she said it multiple times, that may be true, but if the powers in the Democratic Party, including her husband, who is the most influential Democrat in the country, believe that only she can defeat Donald Trump, I believe that she could be persuaded. Documentary filmmaker Joel Gilbert joins us today to talk exactly about that very real possibility. And keeping with a tradition that we've developed here on the Roger Stone Show, today we're going to have my wife, Nydia Stone's much coveted chocolate brownie recipe. So you're going to want to get a pen and a paper and stand by for that, because before the end of the show, you're going to have the recipe for the fudgiest, chewiest, most wonderful brownies you've ever had. So buckle your seatbelts. We've got a great show for you today. I'm Roger Stone. Don't touch that dial, and we'll be right back.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and yes, this is The Roger Stone Show on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. My guest now is Colonel John Mills. Colonel Mills is a national security professional who has served his country with distinction in 5 eras: during the Cold War, during the so-called peace dividend, during the War on Terror, during the World in Chaos, and now, while we face the great power showdown and the fight to save our country. He is a former director of cybersecurity, policy, and strategy for the U.S. Defense Department. He is also a senior fellow now at the Center for Security Policy. When I want to know anything about international geopolitics, warfare, cyber terrorism, Colonel John Mills is where I go, and I'm very happy to welcome Colonel Mills to the Roger Stone Show this morning.
Roger, thank you. It's always an honor to be on the show with you. Thank you so much.
Colonel Mills, several weeks ago, one morning I woke up and I went to my cell phone and it didn't work. Now, I'm on AT&T. I didn't know until I could get online that there had been an outage specifically of AT&T cell phone service. Now, it came back after a couple of hours, but I learned immediately how completely reliant we are on these devices. I couldn't reach my children, I couldn't reach my wife, I couldn't reach my coworkers. This happens, once in a while when you misplace your phone. I'm sure everybody's had that experience, but the FBI director keeps saying that the Chinese have made deep inroads in terms of endangering our power grid, endangering, our internal infrastructure. I don't know whether he just said that because he wanted the foreign intelligence security apparatus FISA renewed, or whether that is a reality. So I guess that's a great place to start. Are we seriously in danger of a power grid shutdown? Could the Chinese really do that?
Well, thank you, Roger. One, yes, the 702 renewal, that was a little element of it. But 2 words, everyone needs to take away Volt Typhoon. That's the name of the Chinese cyber attack that's been going on since it was publicly announced in May of 2023. And the histrionics of Ray, of FBI Director Jen Easterly, of the new NSA/Cyber Command Director General Hawk, they have been over the top spasmodic about this. And they said flat out, this is preparation for war. It's called pre-placement of malware on all the different important things, such as the power grid, such as data centers. I just came out with 2 articles, one in Newsmax Platinum, one in Epic Times, about the data centers and their vulnerability. The Chinese are in a full-blown, full-throated sprint to pre-place malware. So when the shooting war begins, all they have to do is click the execute button and boom, our power grid is down. So this is a very real issue and matter. And yes, I would say 80% of their histrionics and testimony since December has been about Volt Typhoon.
I personally went out and bought a satellite phone. I'm just now learning to use it, but I was so upset when AT&T went down. I realized the possibilities. And I would urge others to consider that. I know many in the military rely on them. I know every U.S. senator, by the way, is assigned one. Every congressman, every member of Congress is assigned one. I think it's a pretty good idea. But are you confident that our government is taking steps to avoid this kind of attack or to repel this kind of attack?
Well, I think there are white hat professionals still inside the deep state, but they are there. I would say there's probably more than we realize. I know there's more than we realize, but I think the challenge is you have a duplicitous Biden team that doesn't really know what truth is. They don't have a known moral starting point to gauge life from. So you have errant and ne'er-do-wells like Jake Sullivan as the national security advisor, who also ran the election interference operation in 2016, who's him and Tony Blinken, who ran the election interference operation with the 51 intel officer letter from the UPenn Biden Center, who goes to China and says, attempts to lecture and finger wag Xi, and all this does is embolden him because Blinken looks like a total fool in these negotiations. So they're duplicitous. They don't know what they want. I think they realize the situation is very real. But again, they've been inviting it. They've been walking around with a big sign taped to their forehead and their back that says, "Punch me here." And that's exactly what the Chinese have been doing.
Yeah, it is absolutely clear, as Ronald Reagan used to say, that weakness is provocative. Weakness invites aggression. And I think that is the lesson here. I had a guest on my podcast show this past week who made the point to me that you folks have to understand that the elevating and empowering Iran within the Middle Eastern region is seen in the Obama School of Foreign Policy as a way to stabilize the region so that Iran becomes a counterweight to Israel. And this is actually their vision. So in other words, when they gave what I think is now in excess, according to the Wall Street Journal, more than $126 billion, or unfroze $126 billion of assets for Iran. And the Iranians promised them initially, before they got the money, of course, that this would be used for humanitarian purposes only. And of course, after they got the money, they said, well, we can use this money for anything we want. And of course, they have. I suspect and believe, based on what I've read, they used it to restart their nuclear weapons development program. They used it to subsidize Hamas and Hezbollah, these Islamic terrorist groups. Colonel Mills, how close do you think the North Koreans are to having a viable nuclear weapon?
I think at this point in time, both them and Iran, we have to presume they have at least a rudimentary nuclear device. I mean, we've been saying Iran is 5 feet away from having a nuke for, holy smokes, I mean, since the Clinton days. Same with North Korea. I think we have to presume and err on the side of caution and presume they have some form of a rudimentary nuclear device, maybe in the range of 20 to 40 warheads, 20 to 50 warheads they can mount on missiles or drop from aircraft. Doesn't mean they're safe and reliable as ours. The old B-61 free fall device is pretty, even though it's ancient, it is engineered pretty, so it's safe and reliable. The safe and reliable is not normally in the description of what they build in North Korea and Iran, but I think you have to presume they have some limited nuclear capability. And the way Japan and South Korea have been working so closely together, which is beautiful, set aside their differences from the past, I think is also an indicator those countries think it's serious and they have real skin in the game. They are closest to the issue.
A couple weeks ago, we saw this media conflagration, certainly, because it was reported that Iran had launched a drone and missile attack on Israel. We were told the drones would get there first, to be followed by missiles. Everyone thought this was a World War III moment. People I know were glued to the television set. But then we learned a couple of disturbing things. First of all, the Iranians let the Egyptians know, who let us know, who presumably let Israel know, that this attack was coming in advance. That makes very little sense. And then secondarily, when you got down to the actual casualties, based on what I saw, one person died. So is this appears to be optics to me. These are optics, but for what purpose? Now, if my interpretation of that is wrong, Colonel, correct me, because you know far more about this than I do, but that's what this appeared to be about to me.
Yeah, hard to tell for sure in this situation. The reality is we have had standing contingency plans for missile defense of Israel to coordinate this effort going back almost 20 years, and it did include the partners of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt. It was a coordinated coalition effort. It worked, I think, pretty well. I think better than expected. Did the Iranians, was this all street theater? It's pretty hard to shoot 350 times at something and miss every time. I think very likely perhaps there was a little inkling of warning or heads up, but I think all things considered, the missile defense worked and worked significantly well, better than expected, probably gave the Chinese pause for concern. Again, was there some street theater involved in this? Oh, yeah, probably a little bit, but I think overall things worked. But one of the takeaways is also mathematically and economically, we blew $1 billion worth of ordnance, with almost essentially 100% perfect shoot down rate. But again, economically, we can't afford this trend line. We have to figure out a cheaper way to shoot down missiles. It was a historic international missile shootout on the night of the 13th and the morning of the 14th. A lot of takeaways from this. Very interesting. I think it worked better than expected. Now, something I caught, there was, I can't remember, I think it was Wall Street Journal said, according to administration sources, which is meaning Jake Sullivan talking on background, we were able to interdict even before launch. What is that? Interpreting that means we were able to reach out through cyber capabilities and really screw up the Iranian launch process, because a lot of it was liquid oxygen, extremely dangerous, a total mess to handle, and the wrong valve turns at the wrong time, and everything goes boom on the launch pad.
Yeah, it was interesting. The coalition, I think, speaks a lot in terms of the overall picture. Many people have said that as Israel and the Saudis got closer together, they were actually, just before October 7th, on the cusp of signing a historic agreement, something that would foster peace in the region. The French and the British, as I recall, were also in there in terms of the Allied effort to shoot down these drones, these missiles. The Iron Dome seems to have held up pretty well, but you're right, it was extraordinarily expensive. It's extraordinarily vexing to me how Jake Sullivan, Special Consul John Durham's report, was up to his neck in the phony Russian collusion hoax. He is the guy who put out the false claim that there was a computer link between a Russian bank, Alpha Bank, and the Trump organization. There was a special computer terminal inside Trump Tower. That was a lie. Jake knew it was a lie. Hillary Clinton herself knew it was a lie. They both approved that line of attack on Donald Trump. And then, as you point out, Antony Blinken, who, by the way, is no better at playing the guitar and singing than he is at statecraft, because I watched him in a Kyiv bar, and Lee Atwater was much better. He was the organizer of the 51 current and former intelligence officers who co-signed a letter insisting that the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop, as reported by the New York Post, had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Yet neither one of these individuals pays any price whatsoever for those political dirty tricks. For someone who went through a 2.5-year crucible only because I'm a friend of Donald Trump, not because I actually did anything wrong, because, as I think anyone who listens to this show knows, there was no Russian collusion. There was no WikiLeaks collaboration. There was no crime here. It's amazing these guys are still walking around. I just find it aggravating, and therefore I had to bring it up. Turning to the Russian-Ukrainian situation, the House very recently voted, I'm sorry to say, another $62 billion for the war in Ukraine. This seems to be printing press money. In other words, when I ask, well, what budget item does that come out of? In other words, where is that? In the planning for the government, where is that money? And that money doesn't exist. They literally just print it up and sell it. Many legitimate stories about some of the funds that we are sending to Ukraine being skimmed by officials there in the government, particularly in the military. It's amazing when I tried to get the footage that I'm sure you saw of all those House members, Republicans and Democrats, on the House floor waving little Ukrainian flags, which I thought was insulting to the United States, embarrassing. I had a very hard time getting license to use any of that footage. The House members did not want that out. It's kind of amazing. But what I guess I really want to know, Colonel Mills, is what is the situation there? In other words, is sending the Ukrainians more money going to give them some kind of upper hand, or are we in a Mexican standoff where neither side really can win, other than chewing up lives and money?
Well, I think, thank you, Roger. I think, simply put, it is essentially a ground stalemate. The Russians are now showing progress in Kharkiv. But again, I don't know if it's decisive to create, to trap, go through Kharkiv, pivot south, and trap a lot of Ukrainian forces. I don't think this is maneuver warfare yet. This is still a war of attrition. Now, I've always been consistent on this. Always give Ukraine enough resources for essentially parity. I think we passed that point 18 months ago. I said there's a number of conditions beyond that. We haven't met a single one of them for any further aid. One of them, you got to make this a lend-lease program, not just throw money at them. It's at least you pay us back. Second thing is a dedicated inspector general, which you note in December they appointed it as inspector general, but I said a dedicated inspector general. It was the DOD inspector general, dual-hatted. You can't do that. It's a huge job. So a dedicated, but you did note that as soon as that happened, immediately Haiti collapsed again in insolvency. Why? Because that was the original money laundering from the operation from the 90s, and the international money launderers said, "Oh, they're onto us in Ukraine. We got to go back to Haiti." Now the third is secure the southern border. Number one, and that actually should be the first one, secure the southern border. We just had a known terrorist, somebody on the terrorist watch list, break in no more than 15 minutes away from where we live into Quantico Marine Corps base. This is the cult and the religion of open borders. And look they're breaking into Quantico, where FBI the academy is, where FBI special units are at, where the Marines are at. This is ridiculous. And again, a known terrorist tried to just drive through the front gate. How did it get here? Open southern borders. So the war is here, right here in our neighborhoods. But all these matters, again, we should be. The Russians are not the enemy. They are not our friends. They are a country with nuclear power. It was Madeleine Albright in the 90s who decided for some inexplicable reason to kick the Russians in the teeth and just hate on them when they were on the ground prostrate. And that ship has sailed. And unfortunately, the Russians and the Chinese now have an agreement to destroy the United States. So I'm a little more concerned with the new treaty led by China to topple the United States.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. We're talking to Colonel John Mills. He's the former Director of Cybersecurity, Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Defense, and we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. We're here with our guest, Colonel John Mills, a man who has served his country during war and peace. He is the former Director of Cybersecurity, Policy, Strategy, and International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Defense, and we are fortunate to have him join us today. Colonel Mills, when we were talking privately, you mentioned your concern about the Chinese and their activities in space. Talk to us about that.
Well, yeah, thank you, Roger. I mean, space activities are within the U.S. government are normally held or what's a special access program, meaning you don't talk about it. But the Director of Intelligence for Space Force just came out with a briefing that gave a lot of details that they just don't normally talk about. For example, China's increased its on-orbit space capability by 550% since the end of 2015. That's a lot. A breathtaking number of dual-use satellites. The ability to image any location on Earth 15 to 17 times a day. That's essentially every hour of any spot on Earth they could get a picture of, which is pretty good targeting data. One thing that really I thought was concerning, 11,000 maneuver alerts a month. That means that's when Space Force detects somebody is moving or tweaking their satellite for absolute best position, for position navigation timing. Don't mean to be too technical. That's very important. Just a few years ago, they were seeing 6 to 7 movement alerts a month. Now 11,000. This means the Chinese are on a hyperspace blitz to get ready for war. And we're producing 6 space analysts a month. I mean, that's not even enough to account for those being forced out of the service because they didn't agree with the COVID vaccine. I mean, this is insanity. I mean, the Chinese are so far ahead of us, and we need a real change in the military. We need to de-woke the military, and this absolute dominance of space by China is just, that was supposed to be our ace in the hole.
What would you say, how do you feel about the preparedness of our military today? In other words, if we, God forbid, should have war, which this administration is entirely capable of fostering a war in order to get reelected in a wag the dog situation, what do you see as the readiness of our military? Could we fight a one theater war, never mind a two theater war?
Well, you know, in the early days of the Bush administration, we finally kind of gave up on the 2.5 war scenario and focused totally on the war on terror. I really should have said during the Obama days, finally that was 2.5 wars was dispensed with. I'm concerned about even focusing on the Western Pacific. I think the real metric and measurement is the absolute horrible recruiting and retention standards, except for the Marine Corps, but everybody else, including the Coast Guard, it's about what it was in 1974 when we went to the all-volunteer force, and 74 to until the Reagan days were pretty dark days, and we're at it again. I mean, look, you can't argue with the numbers. Historic shortfalls in recruiting and retention. That does not bode well for the readiness of our military at all.
It is a vexing situation. I'm deeply concerned not only about the woke status of our military, but also the question of preparedness. On the other hand, in this day of high technology, a war with actual ground troops, I'm not even sure that could happen, given this enormous influx at our southern border. And experts I know tell me the 10 million number is low. They keep insisting that number is low. 10 million illegals having entered the country since Joe Biden became president. So here's, I guess, the $64 million question. Colonel Mills, what are the chances of a terrorist attack on American soil in the very near future? I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Well, I think extremely high. Again, we just had a known terrorist on the terrorist watch list try to drive into Quantico 15 minutes away from my house. I've gone through that gate many, many times. You know, so they are actively, not just Chinese nationals, but terrorists are actively probing our bases. I mean, I would call that a terrorist attack. Ray is bouncing off the wall about a domestic terrorist attack, but I think it's also they're trying to play the boogeyman of right-wing extremists. Just a total false narrative there. But I think we're in a real situation. And look, with all the Chinese special operators, with the open southern border, I think it's a very real issue. And I think it's very high probability. And again, just a couple of days ago, a known terrorist trying to drive in through the front gate of Quantico Marine Corps Base, a sensitive location. I think that's right. That's where all the presidential helicopters are at. I forgot about that. So, I think it's a pretty big deal, and I think very likely.
All right. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank our very special guest, Colonel John Mills, for joining us today. And also want to remind you all to stay tuned, because before the end of the show, as I said at the beginning, I'm going to give you the special, much coveted recipe for Mrs. Stone's chocolate brownies. Thank you very much, Colonel Mills. This is The Roger Stone Show, and we'll be right back.
This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I'm now joined by Mike Davis. Mike Davis is the former chief counsel for nominations of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, working for Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, a truly great American. Mike Davis is also the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, A3P. You can find it on Twitter. This organization defends constitutionalist judges and the rule of law. He's also managing partner, of course, of his own law firm. Mike Davis has been a keen observer of the tsunami of lawfare against President Donald Trump. He attended the trial in its early days. He's kept tabs on it, as he has on the Florida prosecution, the so-called disclosures case, the immunity question before the Supreme Court. I have so many things I want to ask. I almost don't know where to start, but Mike Davis, thank you so much for joining us on the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you for having me, Roger.
So the New York trial, this takes twists and turns that are very almost entertaining. So Keith Davidson, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, the lawyer who negotiated the non-disclosure agreement with Michael Cohen, he was actually arrested in an FBI sting when a ring was seeking to extort Hulk Hogan over a sex tape. So when the blackmailers approached Hogan, Hogan went directly to the FBI. They set up an elaborate sting, and Keith Davidson was among those arrested. Strangely enough, while everybody else in that case was prosecuted, Mr. Davidson was not prosecuted. Later on in the case, his name started to be redacted from all of the government's documents regarding the prosecution of those who were involved. And sources tell me that his get out of jail free card was to give them all of his correspondence with Michael Cohen, thus first bringing the government's attention to the non-disclosure that Cohen had arranged with Stormy Daniels. And then, of course, you had Stormy Daniels herself, who testified. She's not central to the case in any way. I'm not sure what that was about. And then Cohen's dramatic testimony, first of all, on behalf of the government, but then yesterday his cross-examination. So that kind of sets the table. Let's start at the beginning. Mike, there's no real crime here, is there?
Yeah, that's the problem, Roger. We've been saying this for many, many, many months, that it is not a crime for a businessman to settle a nuisance claim with a non-disclosure agreement, hush money, as they're trying to say. In this case, it is routine. I've been a lawyer for nearly 20 years. I have settled nuisance claims on behalf of business people and businesses routinely. And as part of those settlements, you give them a payment, and they agree to keep their mouth shut. Non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements. That is very, very, very routine in the legal world. That's not a crime, and it is certainly not a crime when you pay your lawyer for a settlement that you put it in your books as a legal expense. I don't know what the hell else you would call it if you didn't call it a legal expense. And that is the theory, I think. They haven't really explained the legal allegations in Soros funded Manhattan DA's office, Alvin Bragg's office, but it seems the legal theory is, or at least the current legal theory, like week 5 into this trial, is that this was somehow a campaign finance violation for Trump to settle this nuisance claim and put it in his personal books, his private books that no one sees, in 2017, and somehow that influenced the 2016 election, and somehow that was a federal campaign finance violation that would take what would be bookkeeping misdemeanors. They're not even bookkeeping misdemeanors because, again, a legal expense is a legal expense. But somehow those bookkeeping misdemeanors that are time-barred beyond the statute of limitations from 2017 somehow has formed on these Frankenstein 34 felony charges against President Trump 7 years later, and he's sitting in a courtroom in New York City for 2 months right during the heat of the presidential election. This is obviously Biden, Democrat lawfare, and election interference. And the silver lining out of this criminal trial for Trump, the first criminal prosecution ever of a former president, a criminal prosecution that the prior Manhattan DA, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, the Federal Election Commission, and Alvin Bragg himself declined to prosecute. And so Matthew Colangelo got sent from a senior Biden Justice Department political appointee, the number 3 office, to bring these bogus charges. The silver lining for Trump is the American people now realize what a sham this case is and what a sham the rest of these cases are against President Trump, this Biden Democrat lawfare and election interference, and it is making President Trump stronger politically. He's going to beat Biden like a drum on November 5th, 2024.
Mike, doesn't the involvement of Colangelo kind of give up the ghost here? Doesn't show what's really going on? I mean, the guy is the number 3 official in the Biden Justice Department. He leaves there to join a county district attorney's office to lead the prosecution in this case. And before you answer, let's add to that the fact that Fonnie Wills, the Georgia prosecutor in Fulton County, and Nathan Wade, who was at least temporarily the special prosecutor against Donald Trump, both visited the Biden White House, both met with the Biden legal counsel, both met with officials at the Justice Department. We know that Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, and Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, same set of meetings, meeting at the White House, meeting with the Justice Department. And then, of course, Jack Smith, the special counsel, who Attorney General Garland insists is given complete and total independence. He too has, and members of his staff have meetings at the highest level of the Biden Justice Department and the White House. Is this not a racketeering conspiracy for election interference?
It sounds like a good one to me, based upon what the Democrats are charging against President Trump. His top aides like Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, his lawyers like Jeff Clark and John Eastman, his supporters on January 6th, they already went after you, Roger, as you know, with their bogus charges against you. And I would say this could be a RICO conspiracy. It could also be a conspiracy against rights, a very serious federal civil rights felony, up to 10 years in prison, when you have people inside of governments and working with people outside of government, like Andrew Weissman now, where they are colluding or conspiring to violate the civil rights of Americans. That is a criminal conspiracy under our federal civil rights laws. And so on January 20th, 2025, the Trump 47 Justice Department must open a criminal probe on this, because you have Biden's fingerprints, as you said, on all of these criminal and civil prosecutions against Trump, this unprecedented republic-ending lawfare that's being driven by President Biden himself. Like you said, Matthew Colangelo got deployed from the Biden Justice Department to bring this first indictment ever of a former president. You had Jonathan Sue, Biden's deputy White House counsel at the time, who orchestrated the Mar-a-Lago raid with the National Archives, with Gary Stern and with Jay Bratz at the Justice Department, who's now Jack Smith's counselor, or number 2. And that led to the 2 Jack Smith indictments, one for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election on January 6th, that's allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887 and allowed by the First Amendment. You also have the non-crime of a former president having his presidential records in the office of former president, which is allowed by the Presidential Records Act. And then you, like you said, you had Nathan Wade actually billing his time, 16 hours of his time, $250 an hour of Fulton County taxpayer money for Nathan Wade's 2 meetings with the Biden White House, including the Biden White House counsel, so they can conspire before Fani Willis brought her unprecedented indictment down in Georgia, again, for the non-crime of objection to the presidential election on January 6th. This is blatant Biden Democrat lawfare and election interference. It is a criminal conspiracy. and there must be severe legal, political, and financial consequences after January 20th, 2025.
Well, if we're going to have something other than a two-tier justice system, you're absolutely right. I do remember, however, when President Trump filed a civil RICO case in Miami, which I thought, by the way, was extremely well put together. This outlined the entire Russian collusion scheme. It documented the involvement of Hillary Clinton and Jake Sullivan and John Podesta and James Comey and Andrew McCabe, the two former FBI officials, John Brennan, the rogue CIA director. I thought it was an extremely well put together complaint. I thought it was important, if for no other reason, just as a chronology. So there was a history someplace of what really happened to Donald Trump, because as you and I both know, there was no Russian collusion. There was no WikiLeaks collaboration. Hillary Clinton lost. That's what happened. But the judge in Florida, in the Southern District of Florida, a Clinton appointee, I believe, he not only dismissed the case, that's one thing, but now he's seeking $1 million sanctions against Trump's lawyers for even filing it. So the lawfare against any lawyer who simply zealously defends and represents their clients, this may be the greatest outrage in the system. It is. We've seen it weaponized again and again against any lawyer who agrees to represent Trump. And then let me be very specific in asking this question. We see the so-called documents case in Florida falling apart. First of all, Special Counsel Jack Smith brings his witnesses to a grand jury in D.C. Then he takes the transcript of those grand jury proceedings and he plays them for a Florida grand jury and gets an indictment. But the Florida grand jurors had no opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses. Have you ever heard of this happening ever before?
It's clearly grand jury abuse by Jay Bratz and Jack Smith and these operatives. And remember what this lawfare is all stemming from. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton had her illegal home server as Secretary of State. And not only did it have our nation's most classified secrets, more problematic for Hillary is it had evidence of the Clinton Foundation's illegal foreign bribery schemes, right, where the Clinton Foundation was making a lot of money off of these corrupt dealings that they had while Hillary was the Secretary of State. When she got caught, she bleach-bitted her server and she destroyed the phones. But guess what? The Russians almost certainly, and the Chinese, but the Russians almost certainly hacked her illegal home server. And so that's where we got the Russian collusion hoax. That's where we got the corrupt, illegal Crossfire Hurricane investigation. They opened that investigation in the Obama Justice Department. They got illegal spy warrants, FISA warrants. They lied to the FISA court so they could spy on Trump as a candidate. They even spied on him as the president, because what they were trying to do is, if that damning information came out before the 2016 election, Obama, Biden, Hillary, the AG, the CIA, the DNI, the FBI, they wanted to be able to say this was a Russian disinformation campaign. It was a Russian dirty trick. You can't believe this. This was the Trump campaign being corrupt with the Russians to try to make up evidence to beat Hillary. And you say, well, that sounds crazy, Mike. How could you possibly think that? Well, that's exactly what they did in 2020 with Hunter Biden's laptop showing the Biden's foreign corruption. You had the CIA working with the 51 former intel agents to say that they had all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. They got people censored. They got the New York Post censored, where the New York Post reporting was taken off social media and taken off the internet. And then the New York Post, America's oldest newspaper, was deplatformed, right? And so what happened was President Trump sued Hillary Clinton, like you said, down in Florida, for the Russian collusion hoax. And as part of that, remember, President Trump declassified the day before he left office via presidential memo the Crossfire Hurricane records. right? Those are very damning. They show that the law enforcement and intel agencies worked with Hillary's campaign, the Steele dossier, to make up the Russian collusion hoax, right? And so Trump was probably going to disclose those Crossfire Hurricane declassified documents as part of his civil lawsuit versus Hillary Clinton. Well, guess what happens? Bruce Reinhart was the magistrate judge down there, and he was on the case. He had to recuse because they found a 2017 Facebook post where magistrate judge Bruce Reinhart was trashing Trump. So he recused. 6 weeks later, somehow Bruce Reinhart's recusal issue magically disappeared, and he worked with Jay Bratz and the Biden Justice Department to authorize the unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful raid on the office of former presidents using the guise of the Espionage Act for presidential records Trump was allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. The whole point of Mar-a-Lago was to go get back from Trump these Crossfire Hurricane records, and that's the point of this lawfare. Biden, Obama, Hillary, they know that they are cooked if these documents come out. So's the AG at the time, so's the FBI director, James Comey, so's the DNI, the CIA, Clapper. So many people were implicated in that Crossfire Hurricane criminal conspiracy, and that's why they ran the Mar-a-Lago raid. That's why Trump is facing 700 years in prison.
You have finally, for the first time, put it all together in my mind. I see very clearly exactly what you are saying. Of course, Jack Smith was very anxious for us not to know what documents this case was about. There are so many redactions in his filings, so many things filed under seal. Judge Eileen Cannon has come under withering attack from the left, the usual suspects, Andrew Weissman, the de facto head of the Mueller witch hunt, the Neil Keitel, the former Solicitor General of the United States, Norm Eisen. These guys use their former government positions to try to give listeners and viewers the idea that they are somehow objective law enforcement authorities and that they're not vicious partisans. Barbara McQuaid, one of my favorites, she defamed me a number of times, but they use their credential as a former prosecutor to persuade you that everything they say must absolutely be true. They're just addressing these issues as, as law enforcement and legal system professionals. But I think you're right. In the case of Judge Cannon, what drives the left crazy is that this, just by the wheel, by the luck of the draw, Trump got an honest judge. So when Paul Manafort, when General Michael Flynn, when George Papadopoulos, when we were prosecuted and went before a judge appointed by Obama, given the fact that the entire Russian collusion hoax was born in a meeting in Obama's office with Obama present, nobody said, "Oh, those guys shouldn't be allowed shouldn't have to go to be judged by a judge appointed by." No one ever raised that question, but now they say, "Oh, Trump's illegal activities regarding his handling of documents," which I think there is none, that can't possibly be handled by a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump.
That's a silly argument. It's a frivolous argument. And you notice that the Biden Justice Department, you notice that Jack Smith is not even making that argument to Judge Cannon. They have not raised that recusal issue with Judge Cannon because they know it's frivolous and may get them sanctioned. And so these lawfare goons on the outside, I would say this, they should also be concerned that when the Trump 47 Justice Department is back in office on January 20th, 2025, that they also may be targets of this probe for this criminal conspiracy against rights, maybe racketeering, like you said, but criminal conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. Because guess what? If you have private actors colluding with government officials to violate an American's civil rights, you're part of that criminal conspiracy against rights. So I would say to all those lawfare people on the outside, like Andrew Weissman and Norm Eisen and many others, that they should preserve their documents because they could be the subject of a criminal investigation.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC. We're talking to our guest, Mike Davis, the former chief counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Mike Davis, highly respected. This is blatant lawfare and election interference by the radical Democrats, including President Biden himself. Oh, Biden is charged, and the one circling that beautiful resolute desk in the Oval Office. Democrats do not have a case against President Trump. This is a witch hunt. This is a prosecution without a case. This is all political. This is done to damage a political opponent like a third world country would do.
That was President Donald Trump talking about our guest, Mike Davis, former chief counsel for nominations to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, where he had the privilege of working for one of the greatest Americans of this century, U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, a man of enormous courage and integrity. And Mike is also the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, which defends constitutionalist judges and the rule of law. Mike, we were talking about the documents case, but everything really, when you come down to it, comes to timing. It seems to me that the strategy here of the radical left, of the Democrats and their handmaidens in the fake news media, is to get some conviction, any conviction, against Donald Trump prior to this election. Doesn't matter to them if he is ultimately, those convictions or a conviction is reversed on appeal. It's all about the optics for the election. They want to get into a debate in which Joe Biden can ensure that President Trump's microphone is turned off when he speaks, and he attacks him for January 6th. He presumably attacks him, they hope, for being a convicted felon in New York City. This could not be more transparent. I guess the final area that I want to explore are the D.C.-based charges against Trump. In other words, first of all, none of these charges were brought in the first year of Joe Biden's presidency, which is odd in itself, nor were they brought in the second year, nor were they brought until the third year. Then at the end of the third year, they begin this strategy, realizing the unpopularity of Biden and his policies, Biden's inability to perform as a candidate, never mind as president, and the burgeoning evidence of corruption by the Biden crime family. They decide that they can't run on their own record. Their record is abysmal. So they have to take out Donald Trump. And originally, of course, we know they wanted to put him through a trial in Florida, which we've just talked about, going through his handling of documents, where I think the decision by Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who ironically was the judge in my Soviet-style show trial, ruled that Bill Clinton could do anything with his presidential documents he wanted, including keeping them in his sock drawer. And then, of course, the January 6th related charges in D.C., which when it comes to a jury is a killing field. It does not look to me, and you'd be better positioned to say, but most lawyers don't believe that there's enough time for the Supreme Court to render a decision on whether or not Trump has and is entitled to presidential immunity, which would, of course, wipe all these charges away. But should the Supreme Court come up with some kind of mixed ruling that allowed the January 6th oriented charges to go forward, is there time? Is it possible? And would it be a violation of longstanding Department of Justice policy to have a trial against Donald Trump in, say, September or October of this year?
President Biden is desperate to keep President Trump in a courtroom and off the campaign trail because President Biden knows that President Trump is going to beat Biden like a drum on November 5th, 2024, and that's why you're seeing this unprecedented Republic-ending lawfare driven by Biden. They brought 4 criminal indictments. They waited 7 years to bring the bogus indictment for the Bragg case in New York. They waited 3 years, 30 months, to bring the 3 other indictments for their bogus cases against Trump there. Then they timed these trials back to happen during the 2024 presidential election season. I don't think they expected that Bragg's trial would be the only one that's going to trial during this election year, but they're going to try to get the others. But President Trump brought in very good lawyers, John Sauer, the former Solicitor General for the state of Missouri, and Will Scharf, and many others, to raise this presidential immunity argument, which is before the Supreme Court now. People laughed about this argument, and it looks like that President Trump is going to win at the Supreme Court on presidential immunity before the end of June, as he should. Members of Congress are immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, not their personal acts. Federal judges are immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, not their personal acts. Why the hell wouldn't the President of the United States be immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, not his personal acts, his official acts? If you can have a president throw in prison his successor, or excuse me, his predecessor, for what that president did in his official acts, you're going to destroy the presidency, and therefore you're going to destroy the country. Does that mean the Trump 47 Justice Department can indict and try President Obama for capital murder for his extrajudicial drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a minor? Does that mean they can name Judge David Barron on the First Circuit Federal Court of Appeals in Boston, who was President Obama's legal advisor at the time as part of this capital murder conspiracy? Can they charge President Biden for his illegal mass parole of tens of millions of illegal immigrants into our country and the resulting crimes? They're the foreseeable crimes that these migrants are committing. Can they charge George W. Bush and Dick Cheney for lying about weapons of mass destruction to go into a war, or at least recklessness around their weapons of mass destruction that led to the Iraq War and, hundreds of thousands of people killed in Iraq, along with American soldiers and others involved with the American government? Do we really want to go down this path? And I think the Supreme Court made it very clear at oral argument on Trump's claim of presidential immunity that the Supreme Court understands the stakes involved here. This is so much bigger than Donald Trump. This is about the presidency and therefore our country.
Very, very well said. I share your high regard for both attorneys Sauer and Scharf. Will Scharf was on the show, did a great job of laying out for our listeners exactly what's happening in this tsunami of lawfare. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank our guest, Mike Davis, who is the head of the Article 3 Project. Mike, tell folks where they can find you on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Article3project.org. Article number 3project.org online, and on X it's at Article 3 Projects.
All right, there you have it, folks. Thank you very much to Mike Davis for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show. And folks, get a paper and pen ready, or a pencil, because before we're done today, I'm going to lay out Mrs. Stone's famous, long-coveted family secret recipe for chocolate brownies. We'll be right back.
This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
This is The Roger Stone Show, and I'm back now with Joel Gilbert. Joel Gilbert is a film producer based in Los Angeles. He's the president of Highway 61 Entertainment. He's also a political commentator and a foreign policy analyst. Produced many great documentaries. One of the documentaries I want to focus on a little later is his incredible documentary, Michelle Obama 2024. He is among the first analysts in the country to predict, and who continues to predict, that Joe Biden will yet be replaced at the Democratic National Convention by Michelle Obama. I've been saying this myself for a couple of years. We're going to tangle about that in just a minute. Both Joel and I believe that this early debate strategy could, in fact, be a strategy at the same time to both demonstrate that Joe isn't up to a debate and plenty of time to remove him before their convention, but it could also be targeted for Donald Trump. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Joel, first, you've produced two great documentaries, Farewell Israel and Atomic Jihad. This is an area of the world in which you have great expertise. How do you feel about the double war that the Obama administration seems to be running? In other words, Israel is our traditional friend. They are our longtime ally. They're the only true democracy in the region. We subsidize them with military and other assistance to the tune of billions of dollars a year. Yet, as soon as Donald Trump was no longer president, and as soon as Joe Biden became president, we basically took our foot off Iran's throat. As president, Donald Trump had crushing sanctions on Iran, which meant that they couldn't sell their more than abundant oil any place in the world, which means that they didn't have the money to not only fund their nuclear weapons development program, but they also couldn't subsidize Hamas and Hezbollah and, well, the October 7th attack on Israel. Once we went back to the Obama foreign policy schematic of elevating Iran within the region as some kind of counterbalance to Israel, just at a time that Israel is on the cusp of making a historic agreement with Saudi Arabia, just at a time that Israel is developing further a peaceful relationship with the Saudis, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, Joe Biden finances essentially the October 7th attack on Israel. Am I wrong in that take?
You laid it out pretty good, and it goes back to the fact that Barack Obama had a natural hostility toward Israel. He's the one that ignited the Arab Spring by embracing Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. And it goes back to the ideology of the far-left socialists. Both far-left socialists and Islamists look at Western democracy and the free market system as a threat to them. So the far-left socialists are natural allies of the Islamists in the Middle East. That's where the hostility toward Israel comes from. When Biden, of course, initially wanted to support Israel, but his base pretty much rallied up against him, and then we saw that leading to, instead of Israel wiping out Hamas in 2 weeks, which they could have done, don't forget they defeated Egypt and Syria in 6 days back in 1967. They could have finished off Hamas in 2 weeks. But it's all been the interference of the Biden administration. Let's negotiate. Don't go into Rafah. Don't do this. Watch out for civilians, such that this thing has lasted 6 months. And I think it's encouraged Hezbollah and Iran and others to join the fracas, with it leading up to Biden actually withholding arms from the Israeli government. I think the Biden administration with Hamas, Egypt, Jordan, and others are scheming to topple the Netanyahu government so they can usher in a Palestinian state, which Gaza was a Palestinian state for the past 15 years anyway. And it's the bringing in of the terrorist groups into Israel that caused this in the first place. The PLO was kicked out of Lebanon by the Israelis. They were in Algeria. And in 2005, Israeli leftists, combined with the U.S. State Department and others, decided, let's bring these terrorists into the country and give them a state, and peace will break out. And it was a fatally flawed idea, and it led to the current war.
The situation in the United States, though, this reminds me very much of 1968. I noticed when President Donald Trump went to Long Island to attend the wake of a a New York City police officer who was shot and killed by a man who had 21 prior arrests. Sadly, New York's bail system and liberal criminal justice system did not allow the police and the law enforcement and judicial system to keep this monster locked up. So he killed a good man. President Donald Trump, I think, made a both heartfelt and very symbolic trip to Long Island to go to the wake, signaled his support for law enforcement, signaled his support for law and order, signaled his opposition to the zany bail policies of New York State. But at that same day, President Bill Clinton, President Barack Obama, and President Joe Biden, in a weekend at Bernie's type moment, were propping Joe Biden up at this high dollar fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall. But the crowds outside, the protesters outside, first of all, the sheer number of them was extraordinary. But then when you looked at them, these were not conservative Republicans who were screaming "Genocide Joe." These were Democrats. These were people of the left. And I think you may have here the kind of split in the Democratic Party that you had in 1968 over the war in Vietnam. You'll remember, Joel, although I'm sure you were a mere child if you were even born, that war ultimately forced President Lyndon Baines Johnson to withdraw for his candidacy for another term. He was eligible for another term, but because of the deep cleavage in the Democratic Party over the war, he withdrew. Now, people don't know this, but he also thought long and hard about jumping back into that race. He actually thought about helicoptering into Chicago. He was in touch with Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago. Texas Governor John Connally, still a Democrat, was urging him to get back in the race, was threatening the Robert Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy wing of the party, who was really left, strangely enough, after the assassination of U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy of New York, was really left with George McGovern as their potential candidate. That party was deeply split, and it is one of the reasons why Richard Nixon won with a plurality in a three-way race. Don't you think it is possible now, as Joe Biden seeks to please both sides in the Middle East, that the Democratic Party could have the same kind of cleavage, particularly if he is their nominee?
I do see that cleavage. I think there is a mob out there that smells blood. The Democrat Party largely acquiesces to mob rule. The mob doesn't want U.S. immigration policy, so they leave the borders open. The mob wants Trump in prison, so they prosecute him. The mob wants Hamas to win, so they cut off arms to Israel. So I think the difference between now and 68 is only that the Democrat Party is going to capitulate to the mob, and they'll capitulate to these demands. That's what I think the difference is. And I think Chicago is shaping up to be the same city. And as we pointed out before, coincidentally, it happens to be Michelle Obama's hometown, and Barack has registered himself as a delegate at the convention. And I think after this June debate, the talk will pick up even more for a Michelle Obama candidacy. We might remember earlier this year, it was a frenzy talking about Michelle going to replace Biden, especially after the Robert Hur report came out. And then I wrote an article in the New York Post explaining how political Michelle was. And the next day, NBC News quoted a mysterious unnamed staffer working for Michelle who said she would not be running, though Michelle said nothing and tweeted nothing. So I think it's going to heat up again.
Well, you and I have talked about this at great length. You have a terrific book and documentary on this. Your documentary, Michelle Obama 2024, really does lay it out, because Michelle Obama, as you, I think, demonstrate, not the person you think she is, not non-political, as she insists, doesn't hate politics, as she insists. I have never said, by the way, that she's going to run for president. What I've always said is that she's going to be drafted for president, that that she's going to be reluctantly persuaded that after Joe Biden, she may be the one Democrat with the ability to beat Donald Trump. I'm not even certain, based on polling, that that's true. Looking at early polling, she trails Trump in almost every poll I have seen. But I also think the fact that she's not a candidate and she's not perceived as a candidate may be damaging her when these polls are taken. Maybe
I would agree that would affect the polls. Look, a very interesting statistic came out this week. Joe Biden had to release his financial disclosures, and it showed, based on his $8 million book deal, he had not sold any books. No books sold. Now, that's a huge indication of popularity. Biden has none. Where are those 81 million people scooping up his books? No one's buying them. Michelle sold 21 million books. She's got 100 million social media followers. So she's by and large the most popular Democrat. She, is the most popular woman, the most popular person in America, probably. And Democrats have pretty much shown that they're done with white men. They're not interested in the white population. They've appointed blacks to the UN ambassadorship, head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, minority leader, Supreme Court. And Michelle's been pushing her When We All Vote voter registration group, pretty much imitating what Barack did before he ran for president. Barack had something called Project Vote in Chicago. So I see a lot of similarities, and I think it's going to heat up here over the summer. Because Biden has no support, none whatsoever.
It's very interesting. You saw less than a week ago in Wildwood, New Jersey, President Donald Trump had a rally crowd of in excess of 100,000 people. I got that number by contacting the Wildwood Police Department for their assessment. They believe that that's an accurate assessment. I got beat up on X, formerly known as Twitter, because liberals have no sense of humor. So, I posted pictures of the rally, and they're impressive. I posted pictures of Woodstock and also a Rod Stewart concert. This was a joke, folks, but liberals have no sense of humor. Any way you slice it, 100,000 people at the Jersey Shore is 100,000 people. I mean, in a 45-year career in American politics, being a veteran of 13 national Republican presidential campaigns, I've never seen a rally of 100,000 people. Now, folks say, well, the night of Obama's election in Chicago, the crowd was larger, but he was president then. That was as a result of the results of that election. But for a presidential candidate rally, I have a hard time finding a rally that certifiably was larger. We could argue about this. It's a trivia question, but Joel, is there any doubt in your mind that Joe Biden could not really gather a couple thousand people? I mean, he goes to a union hall in Philadelphia and he gets fewer than 200 folks.
Look, all of Biden's campaigning, whenever they say he's on the campaign trail, he's always 5 miles from his Delaware house somewhere in Pennsylvania, Scranton, Philadelphia. It's always 5 miles from his beach retirement home. So I don't think he can campaign. And I think they realize that. The only person that can compete with Donald Trump's 100,000 rally is Michelle Obama. She can fill up stadiums. She's that popular. I went to her book tour last year where she gave a talk and people were lined up 3 hours in advance and sold out and screaming and cheering and dancing. That's what the Obama name does. And so I have no doubt at the August convention in her hometown, the convention will be screaming, Obama, Obama, in order to replace Joe Biden, because there is no demographic group, black, white, young, old, that supports Joe Biden, who can't sell a book and can't get people to come out. And that's where the plausibility comes in, because if the ballot harvesters get Biden over the top in November with this mail-in ballot nonsense all over the country, no one's going to believe it. Everyone will say there's no way Biden won. Michelle Obama is plausible. You'd say, well, I guess she won because she's so popular. So I think there are changes coming, and certainly, as you say, Donald Trump commands a huge pop culture following across the country.
Yeah, it's interesting. She would have, strangely enough, despite the fact that Joe Biden really has pursued the policies of her husband, she does have the ability to say, "Oh, I'm a clean break. I mean, I'm not responsible for the high inflation today. I'm not responsible for the high gasoline prices today. I'm not responsible for the international situation. That's Joe Biden. I would do things differently," which of course she wouldn't. But people are extraordinarily naive. Those on the right who snicker about her candidacy, who want to make jokes about her gender, I think that is an enormous mistake. I think she would be an extraordinarily formidable candidate. First of all, she could raise whatever funds are necessary. I mean, Biden is already massively outraising Donald Trump. He's an incumbent, so that is to be expected. But Trump, despite his hard work and his best efforts, will be outspent. The Republicans will be outspent. That hasn't normally been the norm. And Michelle Obama would be an even more prodigious fundraiser. But people ask me, look, how exactly could this work? Isn't it too late? No, until they bring the gavel down and declare who the nominee of the Democratic Party is, it's not too late. So the way I see this unfolding, particularly in view of this early debate. So if the early debate is indeed perhaps a trap, we've never had debates prior to nomination. That's never happened in America. We're now looking at the first debate, June 27th. If Joe Biden bombs, they now have the excuse they need to replace him. All he has to do is continue wrapping up the nomination. He's got the votes to be nominated now. He announces not that he is resigning, but that he is not seeking another term. That leaves Joe Biden with the legal authority, conceivably, to pardon his son, his brother, himself, perhaps, other members of the Biden crime family, but it removes the imminent danger of him taking the entire Democratic ticket down. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank my guest, Joel Gilbert. Joel, people need to see your documentary. Tell folks where they can get it.
Yeah, please go to MichelleObama24.com, MichelleObama24.com, and that'll link you up where you can live stream the film and buy the book version as well, MichelleObama24.com.
All right, many thanks for documentary filmmaker Joel Gilbert for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show. Welcome back, folks. This is Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show. A lot of talk about debates in today's show. Many questions about where this leaves Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He, of course, is complaining about the fact that CNN and ABC have arbitrarily cut him out of the process. My argument would be that he should only be allowed in the debates, just like anyone else, if he ultimately gets on the ballot in enough states to garner 270 electoral votes needed to win. The process of getting on the ballot in the states is extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming. He has not, and he will not, by June 27th, be able to establish whether he's on the ballot in enough states to actually theoretically win. If he actually achieves that, then yes, I think he and the Libertarian Party candidate and the Green Party candidate, if they make that same ballot access threshold should be allowed in the debates. But by June 27th, when presumably CNN has this first debate, we will not yet know whether he and his running mate will be on the ballot or not. So I really think that he's out of luck for this first ballot, and I don't think he has a cogent argument. We do know that Trump and Biden will both be the nominees of their party. Well, we're certain about Trump. If this debate goes badly, as I've said earlier on the show, there's a possibility that Joe Biden could yet be replaced. But at a minimum, at this juncture, it's fair to say that both of them are the prospective nominees. You know, we have a tradition here at the Roger Stone Show. I have been systematically going through my mother's recipes, which of course means that they're my grandmother's recipes. As I have said on the show, I'm half Italian and half Hungarian. I'm Italian from the waist down, and therefore most of the time I have brought you recipes that are either Italian cuisine, Hungarian cuisine, and so on. But today, something very special, and that is my wife, Nydia Stone's chocolate brownie recipe. These are, folks, I guarantee you, the greatest brownies you have ever had. I had a very hard time getting Mrs. Stone to write this out for me. It's such a family secret, but here's what you're going to need. You're going to need 6 beaten eggs, large eggs those are, 3 sticks of butter, 6 unsweetened chocolate squares, 3 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 3 cups of granulated sugar, 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, not the self-rising kind of flour, and 1 bag of crushed walnuts. Well, that's if desired. In a microwave, melt the butter with the chocolate squares at medium heat, being very careful not to burn it. Now, in a large mixing bowl, mix together the flour, the sugar, the vanilla extract, and then add the eggs. Now, mix in the batter. The chocolate mixture should be mixed until smooth. You could add the walnuts at that point, or you could save them to sprinkle on the top later. That's totally up to you. Now, rub butter all over the inside of a 9x12 baking pan. Use glass, don't use metal. Add flour and roll around until the entire pan is covered with butter. Now, pour the brownie mixture in the pan, even it out, and once again, you could sprinkle the walnuts on at this time if you prefer. You bake in a preheated 350-degree oven. I recommend using an oven thermometer to check the accuracy for approximately 35 to 40 minutes. Now, this is very important. Mrs. Stone said to be sure to tell them this, so I will. At 35 minutes, open the oven and insert a clean knife in the middle of the brownies. If the mixture is really still wet, continue baking until the knife comes out with some brownie mix sticking to it. If you bake beyond this point, your brownies will become dry and cakey. That is the most incredible brownie recipe you can imagine. Every Christmas, Mrs. Stone bakes dozens and dozens and dozens of batches to send to friends and family across the country and in the neighborhood. So it is one that I recommend. Yes, I am working on a 77 WABC cookbook of all of my recipes when I'm not busy trying to save the country. I'm very, very proud to be a member of the 77 WABC radio family. I grew up right there in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. Went to John Jay High School in Katona, New York, was elected student body president there on a vote of 947 to 116. the New Yorker magazine reported when I was indicted in the Mueller witch hunt, a total fraud, that I was unpopular in high school. Evidently, they can't count votes. Anyway, thank you for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show. Again, go to the App Store and download the 77 WABC radio app so you don't miss any of the amazing programming, either entertainment or talk, here on the most dynamic and powerful AM radio station in the entire country. Now, don't go away, because my good friend Joe Piscopo, a guy who's got quite a set of pipes himself, is going to be right along with his great program, Sundays with Sinatra. Until next Sunday, thank you for joining us on The Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC Radio.